Introducing YouTube memberships, a fun way to support the channel while getting some exclusive perks. Click the join button to become a member now and get benefits like badges next to your name on videos, behind-the-scenes photos, advantages during the live trivia game, discounts on merchandise, private one-on-one video chats, the ability to request future video topics, and exclusive 8 to 10 minute videos on the history of the NFL. And now, on with our feature presentation. When there's an injury that takes place during an NFL game, what usually happens when it comes to the coverage of the game itself? Obviously, for any broadcast that's worth its weight and knows what they're doing, they're going to announce the injury over the air. A player leaves the game and is shaken up. Naturally, the fans watching at home want to know why that's the case, and the broadcast, when they get the necessary information, will announce that over the air. To not do that would be defeating the whole purpose of having sideline reporters, and would not be doing your due diligence. And this is especially true if it's the most important position on the field, the quarterback. Can you imagine if Patrick Mahomes went down in a game, got replaced, and the broadcast didn't say anything about his injury status, and just pretended as though it never happened? It's almost unfathomable. Truly, it's crazy to think about. Well, the man you've been watching this whole time is Buffalo Bills quarterback Dan Darragh. Of all the quarterbacks in the history of the Bills franchise, you could make the legitimate argument that he's the worst of the bunch. The Bills drafted him in the 13th round of the 1968 Common Draft. And look, on one hand, for a 13th round pick chosen in the mid-300s to even play in the NFL or the AFL is an accomplishment in itself. There were 26 players taken in the 13th round that year, and only 7 of them, so about 30%, even played it down to professional football. But Darragh was, well, less than stellar, I'll put it that way. He was the kind of guy that made E.J. Manuel look like Jim Kelly, or J.P. Losman look like Josh Allen. But during a 1969 game against the New York Jets, he had one of the strangest moments by any quarterback. Not just in the over 60-year history of the Buffalo Bills, but one of the strangest moments I've ever heard of for any quarterback, period. It's a moment that doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense, and it's a moment that would never, in a million years, happen today. However, seeing as the Jets and Bills are playing each other this Sunday, if you're watching at the time of this video, this seems like as good of a time as ever to talk about this story. Because this is the story behind one of the most bizarre moments by any quarterback in the history of the Buffalo Bills. Before I talk about the bizarre controversy in question, we need some context to understand the importance of this scheme, how the game was going, and the quarterback that was playing for the Bills on this day. It's November 9th, 1969. It's week 9 of the AFL season, and we've got an AFL East battle on our hands down at Shea Stadium in Flushing between the Buffalo Bills and the New York Jets, two in-state rivals. For the Jets, this would be a big win for them. They sit at 6-2 atop the division, 2 up on the Houston Oilers, and while they're comfortably in the playoffs, a win here would help further cement their status as the number 1 seed in the division and a guaranteed home game in the postseason. As for the Bills, I cannot believe I'm saying this about a 2-6 team, let alone one that looks awful and has dropped 3 straight. But this is actually a big game for them in the playoff picture, because even though 2-6 would usually have you eliminated by this point in the season back then, the AFL East in 1969 was absolutely terrible, as besides the Jets, not a single team was above 500. If you win this game, you could be within 1 game of a playoff spot with 5 to go. Seriously, it's insane. But with 2 teams from each division now making it to the playoffs for the first time ever, you can actually do it. But you've got to get a win here against the heavy 15-point favorite, the defending Super Bowl champion New York Jets. And unfortunately for Buffalo, even though they put up a fight, actually outgaining the Jets in total yardage and hanging with them for the vast majority of the contest, it wasn't enough, as the Jets won it 16-6 in a low-scoring affair where Bill Mathis scored the only touchdown of the game all the way back in the second quarter. Buffalo had plenty of scoring chances and plenty of chances where they drove into Jet territory. 7 times throughout the game, they got into Jet territory, but they only scored 6 points on it. When it's not your day, it's not your day. Case in point, this man right here, quarterback Dan Darragh. Now usually, when the Bills lose a game, it's because Darragh plays absolutely terribly. The man truly might have been the worst quarterback in pro football who was starting games, as you can tell from all these lowlights. And that's saying something, because there were a lot of bad quarterbacks back then. In 1968, as a rookie, after a slew of injuries and just some horrible luck at the position, Darragh started 7 games and was atrocious, throwing 3 touchdowns and 14 interceptions while completing less than 43% of his passes and posting a passer rating of 33, which is worse if he did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play. And this wasn't over the course of one bad game or anything like that. This was over the course of an entire season. His touchdowns-interception ratio was nearly 1-5. He was so bad that he was quite literally the first and only player in AFL history to throw 3 or fewer touchdowns while throwing 14 or more interceptions in the same season. And in 1969, Darragh was not much better, as entering the game against the Jets, in 2 appearances, which came off of the bench in Week 7 against the Miami Dolphins, and as a starter in Week 8 against the Kansas City Chiefs, he went 16 for 42, completing 38% of his passes with 1 touchdown, 6 picks, 10 sacks, just 113 net passing yards, and a passer rating of 23.3, which is somehow even worse than 1968. And he was already pretty freaking bad in 1968. I'm not kidding when I say that Dan Darragh probably was the worst quarterback in the history of the Buffalo Bills organization, which is no small feat considering how many bad quarterbacks have come through those doors. However, on this day, Darragh actually looked pretty good. You know that saying about a blind squirrel finding a nut? Darragh was the squirrel, and the Jets were his nut. Because on this day, Darragh got the start and looked legitimately impressive, going 8 for 10 with 152 yards, no interceptions, and a passer rating of 118.7. For some perspective on how good that was, Darragh made 11 starts in his pro football career. Here was his passer rating in all 11 of them, with the vast majority of them being below that 39.6 line. His highest rating excluding this one, and the only one even above 50, was a 1968 game against the Oakland Raiders where he was still awful. In that game, he had a rating of 56.2 while completing 20% of his passes and having negative 39 net passing yards. And that was quite literally the best performance of his career in a start. But this game against the Jets was in another stratosphere in all the best ways. It was the only one where it looked like Darragh knew how to play the sport. That was until he got injured. Because of course, the one time Darragh looks good and is slicing and dicing the Jets defense, it doesn't last forever. As with 8:15 left in the second quarter, Darragh gets thrown to the ground as he's throwing a screen pass to Billy Masters. There's no footage of the play, unfortunately, and there's not really any footage of Darragh in this game against the Jets, which is why you're just watching his lowlights. But after the play, Darragh couldn't go the rest of the way. He was wincing in pain. He went to the sidelines. He had a separated shoulder. Just like that, his season was done. A horrible way for his season to end, especially considering that this was the first time that Darragh actually looked like a quarterback. And this is where things get really bizarre. Obviously, there's nothing too bizarre about a quarterback getting injured like this. You throw a pass, you get taken down to the ground, and you separate your shoulder? It happens. But the moment that it happened and he was on the sidelines, Darragh did something rather unusual. Because he knew that his wife was watching the game at home back in Buffalo, and he was concerned about the well-being of his wife. You see, his wife was expecting this week, and the last thing he wanted to do was scare her with the injury. So, in an effort to prevent his wife from finding out about the injury and panicking, he flagged down someone working for NBC on the sideline, the network broadcasting the game, and said, "Hey look, I know I got injured, but can you not announce that I got injured over the air? I don't want to freak my wife out." Seriously, imagine Trevor Lawrence getting injured in a game and flagging down someone from CBS to say, "Please don't announce my injury on TV." That's what this was like. Dan Darragh was seriously suggesting to NBC to not report on the news of the game, heck, the biggest news of the game, by just pretending that the injury never happened. Now look, on one hand, I completely get it, and I want to be sympathetic. You've got a pregnant wife who is due in a few days. The last thing you want to do is scare her, because that could cause some complications with the pregnancy, and that could seriously endanger the process. She's got enough to worry about as it is. She's delivering a human, and her mind is preoccupied with that. It's way bigger than football. Add in a separated shoulder injury to her husband, with a husband in pain, and possibly never being able to play again, and yeah, that's extremely stressful. You can debate whether or not the wishes of one person should make a difference on the wishes of a ton of other people, which are all the fans watching the game who want to know what happened. Because none of those fans are going to potentially die if they don't hear the news about Darragh's injury. So trust me, I get that he wants to be caring and protecting of his wife, and wants to shield her from the bad news when she's got a ton going on. On the other hand, dude, your wife isn't blind. She has eyes. This is the most asinine thing I've ever heard a quarterback request. You said she's watching the game. She saw you go down with a shoulder injury. She saw you leave the game. She saw you on the sidelines. And you were very clearly not benched, seeing as you were playing maybe the best game of your career up until that point, and you're not going to get benched after throwing a completion. Like, she knows that something happened. If you're watching a Chiefs game, Patrick Mahomes is playing lights out, and then he goes down to the ground and is holding his shoulder and leaves the game for the rest of the contest, you're not thinking, "I'm sure he's fine." She knows something happened. There is no plausible universe in which she is watching the game, seeing what's unfolding, and thinking to herself, "That's weird. I wonder why they pulled him." And let's suspend reality even further. Let's play pretend and assume that your wife is a moron and Julie has no idea that you left the game because he got hurt, even though that was painfully obvious. What are you going to do after the game? That's right, you're going to come home to your wife. You're going to see her. And you're probably going to be in some sort of cast or in some pretty significant pain. You don't think she's going to find out right then and there? Whether she finds out later that night at home, or whether she finds out while watching the game, she's going to find out. This isn't something that you can necessarily keep a secret, especially because even if, for some insane reason, she didn't find out at home because she's even more blind than what we previously thought, it's going to pop up on the injury report and is going to be reported on eventually. You can't hide this. It's not something like a concussion where it's an invisible injury that you can't see. It's a freaking separated shoulder. Trust me, she knows. And she will know either way before the baby is coming. It's like if you're meeting someone through a dating app and you don't put your height on there because you like her, but you know based on her profile that she doesn't want someone under 6 foot. Like at some point or another, she's going to find out you're not 6 feet tall. This isn't some event that you can hide and keep a secret. This is a physical part of you, and a physical thing that happened to you, and that everyone could see clear as day. So while I appreciate the sentiment, and believe me, I truly do, because I completely understand wanting to shield your wife of any stressful news that she doesn't need in her life right before she's about to deliver your child, this is one of the stupidest requests I've ever heard of in my life. The heart was in the right place, but the brain was absolutely positively not. The injury to Dan Darragh in the game between these two teams behind me right here would end his 1969 season, as he wouldn't play for the Bills again for the rest of the year. And while he did come back in 1970, he was no better. In fact, he probably saved his worst for last, as in 1970, he started 2 games, the Bills lost both of them, he didn't throw a single touchdown pass, and he finished the year with a passer rating of 17.5. By the time his career in Buffalo ended after that 1970 season, his stat line was abysmal. Just 1 game won, 4 touchdowns, 22 interceptions, and a touchdown-to-interception ratio of 1 to 5.5. I mean, that's just atrocious no matter how you want to look at it. And even though Dan Darragh played well against the Jets, even in the 1 game he didn't look good in, he still looked terrible because of this asinine request that I can't believe was made, because it made no sense at all, because she was going to find out eventually one way or another. Look, Darragh's heart was in the right place, and I get what he was trying to do. But why did he think this grand plan of his would work? His wife isn't stupid. She knew something was up the moment he left the game. She saw her husband take a shot, get hit, and leave the game in a ton of pain. And clearly, he wasn't benched, because he was playing lights out, relatively speaking. She knew something was up. Whether NBC announced it or not wouldn't make any difference. And even if it did, she would still find out when you got home that night, and she tried to give you a hug, and you'd be wincing in pain because you can't move your shoulder. Either way, something like this would never even be considered today. And for good reason. It's not fair to the viewers watching at home, and even if it's done with good intentions in mind, they're going to find out one way or another, especially with social media. But in 1969, Darragh was hoping that his shoulder injury wouldn't require his wife needing a shoulder to cry on. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.